All right, so today we're diving into something pretty intense.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're looking at this YouTube video, and the title alone is a lot.
Okay, lay it on me.
It's called, and I'm quoting here, Conditions of Mitchell's Plain Anti-Black Open-Air Concentration Camp.
Whoa.
Yeah, pretty heavy stuff.
Definitely grabs your attention.
Absolutely, and it's from this channel called Wake USOP in the Hood Productions.
So right away, we know they're not pulling any punches.
Not at all. They're coming in strong with some serious accusations.
And where is this all taking place?
They're focused on Mitchell's Plain. It's a township near Cape Town in South Africa.
Okay, I'm getting a sense of where this is going.
Yeah, they're basically claiming that Mitchell's Plain is being neglected and mistreated, and they use some pretty strong language to make their point.
Well, let's unpack it then.
Okay, so one of the first things they hit on is overcrowding, especially when it comes to schools.
Overcrowding, that's a common problem in a lot of urban areas.
Right, but they give this specific example of Berman High. This school has been operating as a temporary school for 14 years.
14 years? That's not temporary, that's practically permanent.
Exactly. And the speaker argues that this is a direct result of the Democratic Alliance, the DA, not addressing the infrastructure needs of Mitchell's Plain.
So they're pointing fingers at the ruling party.
Yeah, they claim that the DA has a huge budget for infrastructure, but isn't using it to help the people in Mitchell's Plain.
That's a bold accusation.
It is, and it gets even more intense from there.
Oh, how so?
Well, they actually use the term open-air concentration camp to describe the living conditions in Mitchell's Plain.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, right? That stopped me in my tracks when I first heard it.
It's definitely a loaded term.
Extremely loaded. I mean, we're talking about invoking some of the darkest chapters in human history here.
Right. Concentration camps represent systematic oppression, dehumanization, often violence, and death.
Exactly. So the speaker is drawing a direct parallel between that and what they see happening in Mitchell's Plain.
So the question is, do the conditions there really warrant such a comparison?
That's what we need to figure out. We need to delve into their specific claims and see if they hold up.
Okay, so what else do they talk about besides the overcrowding and the concentration camp analogy?
They go on to talk about the lack of economic opportunity for the residents of Mitchell's Plain. They say that jobs and contracts aren't going to people in the community.
Even though unemployment is high, I'm guessing?
Exactly, and they even mention having boxes of CVs from people who are desperate for work but can't find any.
Boxes of CVs, that's a powerful image.
Right, it really paints a picture of desperation, of people being shut out of the economic system.
And we have to remember, this is all happening in South Africa, a country with a long and painful history of racial and economic inequality.
Absolutely, that context is crucial. We can't ignore the legacy of apartheid and how it continues to shape South African society today.
It's like a shadow hanging over everything.
Yeah, and the speaker in the video definitely sees that shadow. They connect it directly to the issue of land ownership.
Land ownership, that's always a contentious issue in South Africa.
For sure, and they point out this stark statistics. They say that the colored population, despite being over 50% of the country's population, owns a very small percentage of the land.
Compared to the white minority, I presume.
Exactly, and they argue that this disparity in land ownership is directly linked to the economic struggles they're describing.
So they're seeing it as a continuation of that historical dispossession, the legacy of apartheid playing out in the present.
That's their argument, and they tie it back to their critique of the DA. They basically accuse the DA of not representing the interests of the colored community and of perpetuating a system that keeps them marginalized.
So they're not just pointing fingers, they're laying out a whole narrative, a way of understanding the situation.
They are, and they're not subtle about it. They're using strong language, making bold accusations.
And trying to rally people to their cause.
Absolutely. They're issuing a call to action, urging viewers to wake up and fight for justice.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. We've got these claims about living conditions, the concentration camp analogy, the critique of the DA, the land ownership issue. It's a lot to unpack.
We've definitely got our work cut out for us.
We do, but I think it's important. We need to understand this perspective, analyze the claims being made, and see how they fit into the broader context of South Africa today.
I agree. We can't just dismiss it or take it at face value. We need to engage with it critically and thoughtfully.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to do in the rest of this deep dive. We're going to delve into the nuances of this situation, consider different viewpoints, and try to make sense of this complex and often contentious issue.
Sounds like a plan.
Let's dive in.
So that open-air concentration camp line, really stuck with me.
Yeah, me too. It's not something you just brush off.
Right. It's such a powerful image and so loaded historically.
It definitely makes you stop and think, like, are things really that bad in Mitchell's Plain?
Well, that's what we need to examine, right? Is that analogy justified? Or is it hyperbole?
I mean, when we talk about concentration camps, we're talking about some of the worst atrocities in human history.
Exactly. Forced labor, inhumane treatment, systematic extermination. It's a dark, dark chapter.
So for the speaker to use that term, it's a serious accusation.
They're not just talking about poverty or lack of opportunity. They're saying that there's a system in place that's intentionally oppressing people.
Right, and that system is comparable to the horrors of concentration camps.
It's a bold claim, and we need to unpack it carefully.
Okay, so let's start with the historical context. What do we mean when we talk about concentration camps?
Well, historically, concentration camps were used to confine and control populations that were deemed undesirable by those in power.
And this wasn't just about putting people in prison. It was about dehumanizing them, stripping them of their rights and dignity.
Absolutely. And often it was a precursor to even worse things, like mass killings and genocide.
So the speaker in the video is drawing a direct parallel between that and what they see happening in Mitchell's Plain.
They're saying that the conditions there, the poverty, the lack of opportunity, the feeling of being trapped, it all amounts to a form of modern-day confinement.
Even if it's not behind literal barbed wire fences.
Right. It's more about being imprisoned by circumstances, by a system that seems rigged against you.
So are they saying that the people in Mitchell's Plain are literally being held captive?
No, not in the physical sense, but they are talking about a sense of powerlessness, of being stuck in a situation that feels inescapable.
Like they're being denied the basic opportunities and resources they need to thrive.
Exactly. And they're pointing to things like the overcrowded schools, the lack of jobs, the disparity in land ownership as evidence of this systemic oppression.
And they're putting the blame for that oppression squarely on the DA, right?
They are highly critical of the DA. They see them as complicit in maintaining this system that's keeping the residents of Mitchell's Plain marginalized.
But is it fair to blame it all on one political party? I mean, South Africa's history is so complex, these issues run deep.
You're right. It's never that simple. There are multiple layers of historical and social factors at play here.
Like the legacy of apartheid. We can't just erase that.
No, it's woven into the fabric of South African society, and it continues to shape the present in profound ways.
So even if the DA were to suddenly change their policies, those underlying issues wouldn't magically disappear?
Not at all. We're talking about systemic racism, economic inequality. It's a long and complicated story.
Right. But the speaker in the video is trying to simplify that story, to make it about good guys and bad guys.
I think they're trying to make it relatable, to give people a clear target for their anger and frustration.
And that target is the DA.
Yeah, but I think it's important to remember that the situation is much more nuanced than that.
Okay, but let's go back to that concentration camp analogy for a second. Even if we acknowledge the systemic forces at play, is that language too extreme?
It's definitely provocative, and it's bound to offend some people.
I mean, are we really comparing the conditions in Mitchell's Plain to the horrors of Auschwitz or the Gulag?
I think the speaker is using it more as a metaphor to highlight the feeling of being trapped, of being denied basic freedoms.
But it's a risky metaphor, right?
Yeah.
Because it could be seen as trivializing the suffering of those who endured actual concentration camps.
It's a valid concern, and it's a debate that comes up whenever people use strong historical analogies.
Like, on the one hand, you want to raise awareness to shock people into paying attention.
But you also don't want to be disrespectful or insensitive to the victims of historical atrocities.
It's a tough line to walk.
It is, and ultimately, I think it's up to each individual to decide how they interpret that language.
One thing's for sure, it sparked a conversation, and that's not always a bad thing.
No, it's gotten people talking, thinking, debating, and that's often the first step towards change.
So where do we go from here? We've identified the problems, we've analyzed the claims, but what are the solutions?
That's the big question, and it's one we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, because we're about to get into the nitty-gritty of how to address these complex issues and create a more just and equitable future for everyone in Mitchell's Plain. All right, so we've really dug into the claims from that video about Mitchell's Plain.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, the historical context, the political landscape, the economic realities.
And it's clear that there are some serious issues at play, things that need to be addressed.
Absolutely, but now the question becomes, what do we do about it?
Right. How do we move from identifying the problems to actually finding solutions?
Well, I think a crucial first step is to shift our focus from blame to action.
Meaning, instead of getting bogged down in arguments about who's at fault.
We need to start asking, okay, what can we do to actually make things better?
That's a good point. It's easy to get stuck in that cycle of negativity.
Right, but ultimately it's about finding ways to move forward, to create positive change.
So, where do we start? What are some concrete steps that can be taken to address the issues in Mitchell's Plain?
Well, I think education is a key area.
Yeah, we keep coming back to those boxes of CVs, those people who are desperate for work but can't find any.
Exactly. We need to equip young people with the skills and knowledge they need to succeed in today's job market.
So, investing in quality education, providing access to vocational training.
Making sure that people have a pathway to higher education if they want it.
It's about giving them the tools they need to build a better future for themselves.
Yeah, and it's not just about technical skills, it's also about critical thinking, problem solving, those soft skills that are so important in any field.
Right. It's about empowering them to be agents of change in their own lives and in their community.
Exactly. And alongside education, we also need to focus on economic development.
Meaning, bringing jobs and investment to Mitchell's Plain.
Supporting local entrepreneurs, creating a business-friendly environment.
So it's about building a sustainable economic ecosystem, one that empowers residents from within.
Right, not just relying on outside forces to come in and save the day.
And I imagine that also means addressing the issue of land ownership, right?
Absolutely, that's a huge factor. The historical legacy of land dispossession continues to impact economic opportunities today.
So what's the solution there? Just giving land back?
Well, it's more complicated than that. It requires a thoughtful and nuanced approach.
Okay, like what?
Well, there are models for land reform that have worked in other parts of the world. It involves things like land redistribution,
Okay.
but also providing support to emerging farmers, making sure they have access to capital and resources.
So it's not just about handing over land. It's about creating a system where people can actually succeed, where they can build something sustainable.
Exactly, and that requires a multi-pronged approach involving government, communities, and the private sector.
It's a big undertaking, no doubt about it.
It is, but it's not impossible. There are examples of successful land reform programs out there.
So there's hope. There are paths forward, but it's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of collaboration.
It will, and it's going to require political will. People need to demand that their leaders address these issues.
That goes back to that call to action from the video, right?
It does. People need to organize, to speak up, to hold their elected officials accountable.
It's about citizens taking ownership of their future, not waiting for someone else to come in and fix things.
It's about realizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable society.
And that's a powerful message, one that I think resonates beyond just Mitchell's Plain.
I agree. These are issues that communities all over the world are grappling with.
So, to our listeners out there, what role will you play in building a better future? How will you use your voice, your resources, your influence to make a difference?
Because even small actions can have a ripple effect. Every conversation, every act of kindness, every effort to understand and connect with those different from ourselves.
These are all steps in the right direction.
We can't just sit back and hope that someone else will solve these problems.
We all need to be part of the solution.
And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about showing up, doing what you can, and making a commitment to creating a world that's more just and compassionate.
So keep diving deeper, keep asking questions, keep challenging the status quo.
And together, let's build a future where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.